Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Highway of the Hidden. I'm your host, Polar Bear. On tonight's episode, we have a very special guest, Mr. D.A. Roberts. How you doing, D.A.?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's an honor to have you here, sir.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Huge fan of yours. Tell us, how did you get into writing all the cryptids and all that? You're very knowledgeable on them. How did you get into it?
I've been into cryptids since the mid-'70s when I was a kid. Seeing the Patterson-Gimlin footage for the first time as a kid. My mother got me all those old-time Life books that had the Loch Ness Monster and stuff in them. So I've been into cryptids since, like I said, since about the mid-'70s, investigating and stuff. And then as I got older, after I served in the military and I did a career as a law enforcement officer, I put all that on the back burner because you really can't be an active cop and still be investigating this stuff, at least not publicly. So once I retired, I went back in at full tilt. I've been writing since I was a kid, and it was just something I always wanted to do, was write some form of horror. I grew up loving like the old Kolchak the Night Stalker, like my hat. Anything horror I used to watch with my mother as a kid, and I just absolutely loved it. So it was just a natural blending of the two to combine anything cryptid related with my horror writing.
I love how you incorporated the military and all that, and you did very well with even the ranks and stuff like that, because you read some military books and they get a lot of that wrong, but you ended up getting a lot of it right. And each one of your characters has like a backstory, and they're all in the same universe. From even reading the Ragnarok series, and that has the specialist in it from, I can't think of her name, but this Wyler, yeah, and she's like a main character in that one, and she's like a subpar in the Wild Hunt series, and I think that's very cool. How did you come up with those characters?
Some of them are very loosely based on people I knew, but others were just characters I needed for a scene and wound up developing personalities. Like, for example, the character of Margolin in the Wild Hunt series. Margolin was just meant to be a throwaway character that just was there for comic relief in a couple of scenes, but I liked him, and as his personality continued to develop, I just kept him around, and now he's like a fan favorite. People love him.
Yeah, he's very funny. I love him. He's one of my favorites.
He's one of those, when I write the character, even I'm surprised at some of the things that comes out of his mouth. I'll be writing dialogue, and I'll stop and go, where the heck did that come from?
He's very funny. He's very entertaining, some of the stuff he says. And then this last one really threw me for a loop, and the way it all came together, and how you have the surprise at the end of who's actually, I'm not going to give it away. You have the surprise at the end of who actually did what. And you're like, oh my God, this makes sense. And left you hanging. You're like, and just wanting the next one. You're constantly just sitting around waiting. Okay, when's the next book dropping? Just sitting there waiting.
Hopefully the next one will be up in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, I'm hoping so. I'm excited for it. So have you ever actually had an experience with cryptid or anything like that?
Yeah, quite a bit. We spent a lot of time out in the woods. My first real experience, I was about 15 years old. I had a deer kill stolen and started tracking the blood, trying to follow the deer kill. And when it was on my uncle's land, and once he found out where I was at, you got to get out of there. He said, that's not a person took your deer. You got to get out of there, because we were communicating on walkie-talkies. So I had a deer kill stolen. I had something approach my deer stand 3 years ago, and it's about 2.5 at this point. It was in July of 23. I actually had a visual sighting of a dog man in the northern part of LBL. And just a few weeks ago, me and Carrie Davis, Pocket Doc, and my son Noah and Robbie Rains from my show, we had some pretty interesting encounters here in the Ozarks. One down at Moon Valley, which is over in Dallas County, and then more over by Table Rock Lake. The one down in Moon Valley was pretty terrifying because we about got ourselves surrounded and cut off.
By the dog man?
No, these were Bigfoot.
Bigfoot?
Yeah, we're watching them on thermal.
Could you explain what the dogman encounter was like? Because that's a cryptid that like one of my favorite cryptids I'm really into. I don't want to see one, but I've always been into it.
Yeah, I didn't expect to see one. I'd planned a trip to LBL to research for a book. It was actually the apex predator Dark Moon I was planning to research. And so my wife and I decided to make a trip, and we were going to spend a week there. And we were staying in Grand Rivers right across the canal from LBL, from the northern part of LBL. So for the first couple of days, I was just running around northern LBL by myself, which in retrospect, probably not the brightest thing I've ever done in my life. Went down to an area called Demumbers Bay, which I more recently found out is right like within a few hundred yards of the original, what they call the kill site, where the family of 4 was allegedly killed by a dog man. And I went out here in Demumbers Bay, right on the shore, about 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't have anybody with me. I was just out there by myself. My wife and my son were back at the cabin. And I was just walking around looking. And I got the bright idea to play. You know what a predator call is?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I used to hunt coyotes, so I had a bunch of these calls on my phone. So I played a dying rabbit predator call, and I don't know if you've been around like large bodies of water late at night, but for some reason at night sound travels really strangely over water, and just playing from my phone with no Bluetooth speaker whatsoever, that sound was just so loud and clear out over that water at Demumbers Bay. And within seconds of playing it, I had multiple inbound something coming in on me from multiple directions in the woods because I was down the boat ramp and about 50 yards down the shore when I played that, and I realized I was about to be cut off. So I started hauling butt for the van and ran back to the van, jumped in, fired the van up, and as I backed up to turn around and go out, I had my bright lights on. There were about half a dozen green eye shine about 8-9 feet up in the trees right where I had just been. So I got out of there. But just a couple of days later, once Nick had got there, my buddy Nick Valente, Nick and I were driving those same roads looking for primitive campsites. And most of LBL is primitive campsites. There's no electricity to it, no running water. You pretty much got to pack in everything you want to take. So what we were doing was we were driving these back roads looking for these primitive campsites, hoping to find one that is either abandoned or because there was hardly anybody camping. We were looking for like remains of campsites or places where we could go look for tracks. And we were maybe a quarter mile up the road from Demumbers Bay on the same road heading back toward the trace. And I was in the passenger seat. Nick was in the front seat. And as we're going slowly down this road, I'm looking out the passenger side. He's looking out the driver's side. We were only doing 3 or 4 miles an hour, just creeping along. And I looked over to the right and off to the right, and I saw something, but it didn't really register what I was looking at. And you look at something and it doesn't really click. But as we're creeping by it, I noticed it turned its head and watched us go. And when it moved, then it clicked. I zeroed right in on it. And there was about a 6.5 to 7 foot tall, completely black dog man leaning with its arm against a tree, just standing there watching us. And of course, I'm hitting Nick in the shoulder and pointing, and Nick slams on the brakes and he turns and looks. And I got a good look at it. I saw it for probably close to 20 seconds, and Nick probably got a good 10 to 15. But it looked like an upright dog. It didn't have a massive bodybuilder build. It had a narrow chest, and the shoulders hung down like a dog if it was standing on its hind legs. But what I noticed really about it was different is the snout was not what you would expect. It wasn't like a werewolf, like a wolf or a collie or something like that. It wasn't short. It was wider and blunter, almost like a mastiff or a Rottweiler. It had a shorter, much more powerful looking snout. And when Nick slammed on the brakes and we dove out, it took off. Fortunately for us, it took off because if it'd come at us, I don't know what we would have done. But it turned around and it ran differently. It didn't just run normally like we would do. It did this weird kind of bound and then went down in a ravine. It covered a lot of territory very quickly. So we go trucking over there because it was only about 30 yards off the road. We go heading over there. The leaf litter is very thick on the ground. We can't find any tracks, but we could find where it had walked. And we could see where the disturbances in the leaves, but it wasn't enough where we could get a track. And we could still hear it crashing off through the trees heading down toward the lake. So I went back over to the tree where it had been standing and put my hand up where my mind was saying right where that hand would be. And it was, if I would to walk up and lean on a tree, you would put your hand at about shoulder level, then lean on it. This was uncomfortably above my head, like way higher than I would have ran. And I'm 5'10", so I estimated it was between 6.5 and 7 feet tall based on its hand placement because it was just like casually leaning against the tree, just watching us. It wasn't like massive like people had seen, and it wasn't like super broadly built like a werewolf. It was just this, it looked like an upright dog, only it had hands, and it was incredibly fast.
That's what blows my mind about them. And I always try to tell people that they're not as widely known as like werewolves. Everybody hears about werewolves, but these dogmen, I don't think they never change shape. You know, like werewolves, they say switch from man to wolf, but dogmen are always there. What do you think? Do you think they're like government experiments gone wrong, or do you think they're just old cryptids that just came out?
The more I researched the subject of dogman, the more I realize it goes back much farther than we ever believed. I don't think that the werewolf legend grew on its own. I think the werewolf legend comes from dogmen because we didn't really have the word for dogmen until the mid 90s. It was invented by a radio DJ up in, I think it was Michigan, talking about the Michigan Dogman. So before then, we had people said wolfman or things like that, a werewolf. Yet, if you look at the history of dogman, the sightings of dog-headed creatures dates back to the Roman Empire. They referred to them as the cynocephali. And even in Catholic iconography, St. Christopher was known as the dog-headed saint. If you can look up pictures of St. Christopher, you have depictions of him with the head of a dog. Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus both talked about encountering these cynocephali on islands during their travels. So this is nothing new. It's just a new name that we know it by. But the farther you dig, and the more you find out these things have been seen down through history, whether you referred to them like the Norse called them the Ulfhed, which were the wolf warriors, the wolf berserkers. There's some debate on whether or not they actually transformed, but it would make sense that they would incorporate these wolf-like warriors. Even the Roman Empire and the Greeks under Alexander the Great encountered these creatures in northern Africa, in the Indus River Valley in India, and they talked about how fierce these warriors were, how they fought against entire Roman legions. And even in India today, in northern parts of India, there are valleys up in the mountains. They tell people not to go because these creatures are still there.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. I've been reading Montague Summers, The Werewolf of Lore and Legend. Actually, I have the book right here. And then I just picked up The White Devil. I forget who it's by, but it talks about werewolves in European culture. And I'm just got into that one. And yeah, it talks about how werewolves go along. But yeah, it's talking about how some people believe it's been around forever. And I read also in your book, and then I heard a while about how Bigfoot and Dogmen have been at war forever, like they're mortal enemies. And I'm not sure how they became enemies. I've heard a legend was that two Native American tribes were getting demolished by these dogmen. And so they just figured the only thing to really help them was to fight giant with giant. And they went to a Bigfoot grave and took a head and rode into dogman territory and threw the head, and that started the war. That's the legend that I read and researched and heard.
I've heard that as well, but I think that might have contributed to it, or at least they started a fight, maybe between two groups that had no contact before. But I think it goes back much deeper than that. We're talking about two apex predators. If their territory ever overlaps, they're going to fight for prey. If you got a grizzly bear and a mountain lion operating in the same area, they will fight each other for kills, because that's just how it works. Large predators rely on the same things to eat. So if they're hunting deer or moose or elk in a particular area and another large predator comes in, they're going to defend those hunting territories. And I think that's just really what it boils down to.
Do you think Sasquatch, now we're going to get into Sasquatch. Do you think they intentionally kill humans, or do you think it's more humans like go into their territory and do something to piss them off and then they kill them?
There's Native American lore of them just coming into villages and taking people. And I think it depends on the type. I think there's more than one type of Bigfoot, and I think some are more aggressive than others. I like to use bears as an analogy. If you look down here in the lower 48, especially down in like the southern states, you've got black bears, and black bears are omnivorous. They'll eat berries, they'll eat roots, they'll eat vegetables, they'll eat carrion, and occasionally they do hunt. But they're constantly browsing. They eat just about everything. You get a little bit farther north, we get into grizzly bear territory. Grizzly bears still omnivorous. They'll eat roots and berries, but they rely a lot more on meat because they're much bigger. You get farther north up to where polar bears are, and that's all they eat is meat. They're not collective browsers like other bears. They hunt and they kill, and they are confirmed man-eaters. And I think it's the same thing with Bigfoot. I think the more harsh the climate, the more they have to rely on meat, and therefore more likely that if you're out in the woods, by yourself, or you make yourself an easy target, it's a target of opportunity. Just any big predators that way. We hear encounters of mountain lions attacking people. We hear encounters of bears attacking people. It's more rare with black bears to attack people than, say, grizzlies or polar bears, but it does happen. So I think it's more of an opportunity case. They will take a human, especially the ones that rely more on meat. And I think it's just one of those cases where you got to catch it in the mood. Once I was up in Rocky Mountains with some buddies of mine, and I kept telling them, I hear a bear. And they're like, no, I don't hear nothing. I was leading the hiking group. I'm like, guys, I'm hearing a bear. Be ready. And we rounded a corner on the trail, and there was a grizzly bear in the middle of the trail. And I played this game with my dog where I reach out and go, boop, and pop him on the nose. I could have done that to that bear. We were 2 feet apart. I could have went, boop. Of course, it probably would have mauled me to death. The first thing I said was, don't run. So, of course, I hear, it's everybody left me standing there nose to nose with this bear. So I'm standing there and I'm looking at the bear, and it had that kind of simpatico moment where it had the look on its face and said, oh crap, it's a human. And I definitely said, oh crap, it's a bear. And it went one way and I went the other. Now, had that been hibernation time, or if it had just woken up, or if it had cubs, it would have killed me. But we had a peaceful interaction. And I think it's the same way with Bigfoot. It just depends on the circumstances. You catch it in a bad mood or you do something wrong, you very well could become one of the missing 411s.
And so you said there's different types. What kind of types are there?
There's one known as the Gugway. It's a Mi'kmaq word, which means face eater. And Gugway are extremely aggressive, and they tend to be more northern, colder climates. They like the beast of seven shoots. They have a more pronounced snout, almost like a mandrill. But recently there have been a lot of southern sightings of Gugway, like they're expanding their territory. There are what's called the Genosqua, which the natives, we called them stone giants because they would coat themselves with sap and then put river rocks in their fur because stone-tipped arrows wouldn't penetrate. You've got the Patterson Gimlin type, which I think is more closely related to the Gigantopithecus. Then you've got other types which people say are far more human-like, and I think those could possibly be relic populations of Neanderthal or Denisovians. So there's multiple types, and what people fail to realize is just how much territory is still out there where they can exist. We started doing some research on our show, and we discovered that in national parks alone, just in national parks, there are 88.5 million acres of uncontrolled habitat. But when you add to that state parks, national parks, wildlife management areas, game preserves, and BLM, Bureau of Land Management land that we still don't have full access, it adds up to over 1 billion. Yes, billion with a B square acres.
Wow. So there's no telling what's in that, what's out there.
Exactly.
That is, yeah. So there's ain't no telling what's in that land then that we have.
For
no
example,
idea.
here in Missouri, the Mark Twain National Forest is about 3.5 million acres by itself, and it runs from just south of St. Louis to the Arkansas line. It covers a quarter of the state. There are little towns in the Mark Twain dotted everywhere, but for the most part, it's just unbroken forest. And I've deer hunted them in the Mark Twain. I've camped in the Mark Twain, and I can tell you there are places in the deep parts of the Mark Twain that may not have seen a human in 50 years or more.
What's some of your more scary, like Bigfoot encounters? I know you said you got surrounded. If you want to touch on that one.
Well, we went down in right at the end of January, 1st of February. Me and my son Noah, Doc, and Robbie from my show, we went down to Moon Valley, which has always been an area that's been odd here in Missouri. There were some guys who went to prison for cannibalism in that valley back in 2021. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
No kidding. Straight up cannibalism. You can look it up. Look up Dallas County, Missouri cannibals, and you'll find it.
I'm gonna have to. Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. I plan on digging deeper into that story itself, but that's neither here nor there. But I used to camp and fish down in Moon Valley when it was a public campground. It's all private land now, but it used to be a campground right there on the shores of the Niagara River. And I spent a lot of time down there as a kid. And we would hear things like circle our camp at night. And we've heard howls. We've heard screams down in that valley. I went down there one time. My oldest son, are you familiar with what a shofar is? Okay, we took a shofar down there, and my oldest son can play it. And he blasted with that shofar, and we were getting calls back, but they never came close. This was back last summer. But we went down there in June, and we started doing some calls, in January. Me, Doc, Robbie, and Noah went down there, and we started doing calls, and it wasn't very long before we called them in, and we had multiple surrounding us. Doc was watching them on the thermal. They lured me and Robbie out. Well, Doc's, I see something moving over there. So Robbie and I started walking closer to it, and we had the SUV parked on the middle of a low-water concrete slab bridge. And Noah and Doc were on the bridge, and Robbie and I headed off the bridge up into the woods. And as we were getting closer to where he'd seen movement, Doc stopped us. We had headsets on with radios. He said, boys, stop and start backing up. I'm like, why? He said, we've got one coming in behind you. You guys need to get back here. They were about to cut us off from the SUV. And of course, we were both armed, and I was covering one side of the road while Robbie covered the other, and we backed up. But had Doc not seen that, I don't know what would have happened because they certainly would have cut us off.
Yeah, it could have ended very badly.
Certainly would have ended in a firefight. I might, come out on the winning end, but there would have been a bunch of empty brass.
It'd have been like, man, that's pretty hairy. That's a pretty hairy situation.
We've had some pretty hairy situations.
Especially dealing with cryptids, because it was crazy. So many people, they just still believe, no, there's nothing out there. That's just the wind, or they'll come up with something so crazy instead of what it actually could be. They'll come up with the most wildest explanation.
It always cracks me up when I run into somebody who says it's just a misidentified bear. And it's usually somebody that's never gone camping or fishing in their life. I'm like, dude, I have spent most of my adult life in the woods of Missouri. You think I can't identify a bear?
And they love saying it down here. I'm from Southeast Texas. We don't have bears. And they have a sighting down here. It's a bear. And I'm like, oh, well, that would have been the first bear sighting in Texas in hundreds of years. But okay, I guess it was a bear then. It's the only black bear ever seen here. But yeah, okay.
You get over to the Texas Big Thicket area, there are a lot of sightings. In fact, it wasn't but about a year ago they had a Gugway sighting in the Big Thicket.
Oh, out there. Yes, Deep East Texas. Yeah, it's very... I actually did some research in my hometown that I'm in. My wife, she sent me a clip, and she said, what do you think about this? And it was in 2015. They had the same monkey sighting. And, of course, everybody's like, oh, it's a monkey. It was a monkey. The people that... It was on the news. The people that were doing the interview for the news... The way they explained it, I was like, there's no way that was a monkey. But the town's very, it had to be a monkey. But there's more open people about it now. But if you look at it and the way they explained the way it moved and it stood up and it just looked around and it was like, I don't know. There's been sightings in the past of there's being one in this area, but I don't know. It could be a Bigfoot.
So many people just want to dismiss sightings outright. I've spent my career in law enforcement. We've sent people to prison on eyewitness testimony, but suddenly eyewitness testimony is no good when it comes to Bigfoot sightings. Yet I've got hundreds of sightings reports, not just from some guy that was out drinking beer while he was fishing. I've had reports from judges, doctors, lawyers, other cops. I've had some very interesting stories told to me by cops who are like, look, I'm going to tell you this story, but you can't use my name because it'll hurt my career. Probably one of the best ones I've ever heard, and I won't tell you what department the guy worked for. I met him at a training conference, but we're both from Missouri, and he's a little farther south than I. And he tells me, he says, I'm going to tell you this story, but I don't want you using my name. I'm like, I got it, no problem. He said, I used to deer hunt over near the Arkansas border. I said, what do you mean used to? He said, I got up on my deer stand, like real early, about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had one of those soft-sided lunchbox coolers. He said, I had a couple bologna sandwiches and an apple in it, nothing big. He said, I took it out there with me, and I climbed up on my deer stands, and he said, I was probably 12 to 15 feet off the ground. I was pretty high off the ground. He said, so I knew I was going to doze off before the sun came up, so I wrapped that strap of the lunchbox around my leg. And he said, oh, absolutely, I did doze off. He said, and I woke up and felt something tugging on that lunchbox. He said, and I opened my eyes and looked down, and there was this creature standing right beneath me. He said its edge was about level with my knee, and it was tugging on that lunchbox. I said, what'd you do? He goes, I released the clip and let it have it. He said, I wasn't going to die over a couple of bologna sandwiches.
Right.
I said, and it turned around and walks off. I said, can you describe it? He goes, it looked like the way people describe Bigfoot. He was like 12 feet tall, massively built, looked like a gorilla. He said, but it was huge. And I said, what'd you do? He goes, I stayed in the deer stand with my hands on my gun, shaking until I couldn't hear it anymore. He said, then I climbed down out of the deer stand, went back to my truck, and went home. He said, the next day, I sold all my deer hunting equipment. He said, I'm not going back out there, never again. And he said, in fact, if you want that deer stand, I'll tell you how to get to it, but I'm not going back out.
Yeah, at that point, I guess just take the sandwiches.
Yeah.
It's crazy how gentle it was. Just here.
Yeah, he said it looked like it could have ripped his leg off, but it was just like a little kid tugging on your shirt, like trying to get your attention. It was just very gently tugging on that lunchbox. And he said, my God, I gave it the lunchbox.
I'm going to take this now. Just give it here. No problems.
Yeah, this is mine now.
Yeah, right. Did you hear about the valley in Alaska that they tell people not to go in because of the giants?
There's a couple stories like that. Are you referring to the Nahanni Valley where they keep finding the headless bodies?
I think so.
There's actually two valleys like that. There's the Nahanni up there where they find dead bodies with the heads missing. And there's another one in southern Arizona in the Superstition Mountains where they keep finding headless bodies. Technically, that's the same mountain range that runs up there. It's part of the foothills of the Rockies. It runs all the way up into Canada and into Alaska. So it's technically part of the same mountain range. And the weird thing is, at both ends of both those headless valleys, there are Native American tribes that refer to themselves as the Dene.
So what do you think's causing the headless bodies? What do you think's doing it?
I think it's Gugwe.
You think so? Do you think
To
they're
me, that's what makes the most sense because their name means facey.
and they're the most aggressive ones?
Oh, they're very aggressive.
Like they
I've
don't
never
give you.
seen a peaceful encounter with a Gugwe. One of the most recent encounters I heard about with a Gugwe was down here, just not too far from me, down near Eureka Springs, Arkansas, in War Eagle State Park. There were two people on horseback chased out of the park by one.
Do you think the other? So, do you think the other types of Sasquatch when they run to the Gugwe? Do you think the Gugwe usually wins that war, that fight?
I would say it all depends on numbers.
Okay.
At one-on-one, I'm going to put my money on the Gugwe because they're bigger, stronger, and they are just absolutely relentless. So if you took out your basic Patterson Gimlin against your basic Gugwe, I think money's on the Gugwe. But if two groups run into each other, I think it's going to come down to numbers.
Right, because the Gugwe are more, yeah. Yeah, because the Patty one, they say that's like a gentle one. That's more the peace-loving.
Those are the ones where you get the encounters where people said, I saw it, it looked at me, I looked at it, and we went our separate ways. But then in the Pacific Northwest, there are stories from the Native Americans of those things coming into the camps and stealing women and children.
So they haven't always been peaceful.
I think it also depends on the area and who they're interacting with.
So we've covered Bigfoot and werewolves. I've also read in your book about vampires. What are your thought on them? Thought on the vampires?
The thought of vampires really existing is a terrifying thought. I know there are cults of people here in the United States that believe the vampires, and there's a whole vampire subculture down in New Orleans. But as to whether or not they're actually vampires, it's hard to say. Every culture across the globe has some sort of vampire lore, a vampire-like creature. Whether it's in Ireland when you've got Abatak, then you've got Vlad Dracula. Sekhmet was supposed to be a vampire in Egyptian lore. There are versions of a vampire in Japanese culture, Chinese culture. There's one in the Philippines called Penagagalin, I believe is what it's called. So there's so much lore on vampire-type creatures, it's hard to just say, no, they can't exist. But it is terrifying to think they're out there. And I think there's a lot more out there than we realize.
Right. There's a lot more than meets the eye. I think a lot more is hidden. Or just run. I don't think it's hidden. I think it's more deeper than what we think.
I agree.
I'm trying to think here. So vampires. So do you have any paranormal experiences?
I've had several paranormal experiences. When I was working as a overnight head of security for one of the local hospitals, I was still a deputy, but they wanted actually commissioned officers to run their security detachment. So I was moonlighting there as an overnight security chief. And in the old hospital, I've seen full body apparitions. The hospital's over 100 years old, the core parts of the building. And there's some really creepy stuff, especially up on the third floor surgery. And in the older part of the building, you can see full body apparitions day and night. There are people, heck, I had something grab my radio strap on my back because my radio strap came up behind me and then hooked to my lapel. I had something grab the radio strap, and when I spun around, there was nothing there. But yeah, there's been lots of paranormal stuff. When I was a patrol officer down in Elk Grove, Missouri, there was this one building that's been condemned for 40 years. I don't know how it's still standing, but it is. There, we would routinely go by there and see lights on the top, and there's not even a staircase anymore to get up to the top.
And would y'all have to go investigate it, or just y'all just keep cruising?
He said, don't go in there. He said, if you go in that building, it's probably going to fall on you.
Oh, wow. Have you ever had any, like, demonic encounters with doing patrol or anything like that?
I don't know that anything I've ever encountered was truly demonic, but I've had some pretty terrifying encounters. I've had things scream at me. There's a cemetery out by Walnut Grove, Missouri, where we would stop and it was peaceful, so we would stop and do reports. I had something scream at me from the woods, which could have been a Bigfoot, but it was very loud and it rattled the windows. And I was, at that moment, I was like, would you look at the time? Yeah, I need to be anywhere else right now.
Anywhere but here.
Exactly. And I've heard disembodied voices. I've had radio batteries just die. Take it off the charger, put it on, turn it on. 5 minutes later, it's dead. And they're out in Walnut Grove. Walnut is a very historical area. It used to be a crossroads of railroad tracks over different railroads. And back during the big cholera outbreak here in Missouri, and I think it was in the 1830s, it was they would bring bodies from St. Louis and Kansas City to Walnut Grove and bury them in mass graves. There are several massive mass graves out there in the Walnut Grove, and it's just a kind of a creepy little town, but I like it. And there's a lot of places around here that are like that. We've got Civil War battlefields around here. We've got lots of haunted buildings, a lot of old buildings, a lot of history here in the Ozarks.
Yeah, I had a lady on that she was in Gettysburg, and she had a lot of Gettysburg encounters, and she sent me a bunch of pictures, and one of them, it looks like a batwing orb, and that was pretty cool.
A friend of mine used to be a volunteer out at Wilson's Creek National Battlefield just outside of Springfield. And one like holiday, he was going out to just drive the park, make sure there's nobody in there. And he had his son with him. And all he was doing was just going to make sure there was nobody in there. He said there was nobody in the park. It was closed. He was just checking gates and just driving through to make sure everything was where it was supposed to be. And he got out and let his son kind of walk around a little bit while he was looking around. And he snapped a couple of pictures of his son by one of the Civil War cannons. And it wasn't until 6 months later he calls me. Hey, I got something on film and I didn't expect it. So he sent me a copy of the image, and sure enough, just plain as day in broad daylight, if you look on just past the trees behind that cannon, you can see a guy in an old Civil War style slouch hat and full kit walking between the trees.
Oh, wow, that's cool. They have a place down here. It's called Four Forks. It's about an hour and a half. It's where I deer hunt at. And it's a old cemetery, old Civil War. It's not really. There's Civil War vets there. I think there was battle fought there. I'm not really sure the history, but there's 3 graves, right? And in the morning, if you drive to it, and the dew will be on the ground, but on those 3 graves there'll be no dew on the ground, just where the bodies are at, just in those 3. And it's pretty cool.
Once in a while, I still get stories from people that live out near Wilson's Creek that just late at night, they'll be like sitting outside or getting a cup of coffee, or they'll just go up behind the house and they'll still hear musket fire in the distance.
That's wild to me. I've always wondered what that would be like to hear something like that. Just be out there and just, oh man, what is it? Or because you see the videos all the time of the Civil War battlefields and people running or marching, or you'll hear people talking and the cannon fire. That's got to be something different just to see that or hear that.
During the filming of the movie Gettysburg, the director was sitting with the camera and he was looking down the line of the extras that were all lined up. And he tells one of the assistants, can you get on the radio and tell the group down there in the other field to back up? They're out of line. And the extras, we don't have a group down there. There was an entire column captured on film, and an entire platoon of men standing out there ready to charge.
Could you imagine like that? Because of the filming and all that, the ghosts, the spirits thinking, is this happening again? Because those guys, they probably don't even know they're dead. And they're just thinking, oh, this is it. We're going to war again. I forgot. Somebody was the Gettysburg lady I had on, she was telling me that they were passing people and they would talk to them and they would come to the camp and they would sit down and these people looked real and the next day they were gone like they were never there. And I was like,
I've heard stories like that. I heard a group of reenactors at Gettysburg. We're sitting around talking, and a guy comes in and sits down at their fire and asks for a plate of beans, and they fed the guy. And he sat there and talked to him. He said, I'm really nervous about the battle tomorrow. I hope we make it through it. And he got out and walked out into the woods, and they never saw him again.
Yeah, could you imagine that? Who's this guy? Do we follow?
Like, we don't know who he is.
Yeah, like imagine they just come up to you and you're full body, like. Man, like that just blows my mind. Some of these encounters are something different for sure.
I know people that have worked out there at the battlefield that have said they've heard everything from gunshots to cannon fire to horses whinnying as the sun's going down out there at that park. I firmly believe that those blood-soaked grounds are definitely haunted.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I think they died such horrific deaths It has to be. They did. I think I read somewhere they smelled the iron in the air for like weeks after it, and I think a lot of it's still what mass graves. They just dug them up, and there back then it was all shovels. They didn't have no heavy equipment, so they got to be.
Just a few miles from where I'm sitting right now, over just at the edge of town, is what's called the Union Campground Cemetery. It's an old cemetery that dates from the Battle of Wilson's Creek. And I've walked through that cemetery many times, and most of the tombstones in it are unidentified. They don't know who it was.
Wow, so the unknown soldiers. How did you come up with Declan and his whole background and all that? Because I love his story. I love how his whole interwoven with Daniel and Gideon. How did he come about?
Well, I wanted to do something that was unique. There's been pretty much every trope imaginable done for heroes in a book. So I wanted Declan to be something different. And making him a descendant of Gideon and quasi-immortal on his own, it just opened up a whole new development for me to be able to write stories about this character. Not only the character progression, but all of the things that historically he's been involved in. I've got plans. He's going to lend into place people like Teddy Roosevelt. Some of those books we're gonna hear about. He fought in the Spanish-American War. Declan's been there and done that, and he's got a whole closet full of T-shirts to show for it. There's going to be a lot of historical references. If you've read those books, you've already seen.
Oh yeah.
He mentioned the Jesse James and the Younger Gang.
Yes.
He's mentioned Doc Holliday. He goes those iconic characters that he's been in a lot of key pivotal moments in history, and those are going to show up in the books.
How do you say his cousin's name? I struggle saying Reardon's name. Reardon. Okay. Every time I read it, I struggle saying it.
And the woman is Siobhan.
Siobhan. Okay. I was calling her like Siobhan. I was like, okay.
And a lot of people do that, but I'm telling you, Irish Gaelic, not the easiest language to pronounce. Like, for example, cheers. Essentially, cheers in Irish is Slainte.
Oh, God.
But it's pronounced sláinte.
Sláinte. Okay, but it's cheers.
Yeah, basically means cheers.
And that prayer, I love that prayer. Is that something you made up or did you read it somewhere?
I completely wrote that. That's an all new one.
That is awesome. I love that prayer. Those books, man, there's the whole series and the way they're all interwoven. So I don't want to give away any secrets, but I have to ask, will we see William Greyfeather again?
Oh, yeah. If you haven't read the book Heart of Iron, you should probably grab that one because that brings him back to the main universe.
Okay, that's the one I'm fixing to start tomorrow. Actually, I just got it on my Kindle today. So that
one brings him back to the main universe. And in fact, the book that I'm writing right now is called Lakeview Man, Dead of Winter. Grey Eagle features fairly heavily.
Grey Eagle, yeah. Why did I say Greyfeather? But I haven't seen him in so long. That's why. Grey Eagle. Okay, so we're getting another Lakeview Man.
Yeah, I've got the one I'm about to finish is the next Lakeview Man. And then I've got a standalone book that's going to be called Mountain Devil of the Absarokas. It's going to be set up in Montana. And then the next Wild Hunt book is coming right on the heels of that. And then I've got several other projects that are kind of on different stages of completion.
Okay.
So I'm hoping to have 5 to 6 more releases this year if I can get everything straightened out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my next one, I'm going to start that other one tomorrow. I'll probably start it tonight, actually, when we get off here, because I'm excited about reading them. I just finished the most recent one with not Declan. What'd you say it was again?
Declan Kane.
Declan Kane, yeah. See, it's Irish. Declan. Okay, I read it the text this way. Sound everything out.
I've done that through the years. I'll read a word in a book, and the only time I've ever heard it was in a book, and I'm completely pronouncing it wrong. And then I use it in a sentence, and people are like, what the heck are you talking about?
I know, and then I ask the author in front of me, and I feel like a fool because I'm like, oh, because you say it right, and I'm like, oh, man.
Especially when I start using a lot of the Native American terms.
Yes.
Yeah, some of those are really hard to pronounce.
Especially for the dog soldiers. Oh, I can't even. I just say dog soldier like in my head when I'm reading it because I'm like, there's no way I can pronounce Hotambo.
Hota Metaneo.
Yeah, I was like, there's no way I can do that. Sometimes I'm like, I'll have to Google it and say, oh, that's how you pronounce it because it's man, they're so good though. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on, brother. I really do.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Is there anything you want to shout out to the body or anything like that?
You guys can check out all of my books at daroberts.net. They're also all available on Amazon. I have a podcast that we do twice a week called DAX Machina, and that is on Wednesdays and Saturday nights at 8 p.m. Central. You can find that on YouTube and on Facebook. We're going to be expanding it to Spotify soon. Check out those, and check out my buddy Roddy's new book. It's an awesome book. You guys will enjoy it. And come see us, and we'd love to have you guys as part of the DAX Machination.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. All right. Talk to you later. That's it for tonight, everyone. If you'd like to be on the show, remember, shoot me an email. My email address is polarbearhoth@gmail.com. Also, you can reach out to me on the socials, TikTok and Instagram, polarbearhoth, or follow the new Facebook page, Highway of the Hidden.